This morning, I want to talk about gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is a very popular thing. I have a great example that I can't wait to share with you that is like a perfect illustration for the teaching. And I didn't even plan it. So I'll get to share that with you in just a second. So what I want to do first is remind everyone that's in the sanctuary that we have the microphone. So if you want the mic, raise your hand. If you have the mic, remember you have the mic to give it to the other person. And then you do not need to talk into it. It'll hear you just like these mics would have heard you. You can just hold it here and talk normal, but you want to talk loud enough for everyone in the room to hear you. Okay. And the mic will pick up. You're not going to hear it come over the speaker, but they will hear you online. Okay. All right. So I just want to hear some thoughts. So when you hear the term gatekeeper, what does that make you think about, or examples or whatever? Yeah, Amanda.
I think a lot of the cartoons with St. Peter at Heaven's Gate, you know, checking with other people are allowed to come into heaven or not. Yeah. So I think of that cartoon is what pops into my head first.
Anyone else? Oh, one other thing about the mic, if you turn it towards the sound filter down, it mutes it. Also, while it's in the air, when you throw it to someone else, make sure they're looking, but it also mutes while it's in the air. Okay, this is not dodgeball church, though I could be convinced. So, all right, gatekeeping. Do you need the mic? Oh, you were stretching, my bad. All right, online folks, anyone? Andrew, anybody?
Right, Tana says, don't forget to, I'll be Wade today. I can speak for the chat. So Tana says gated communities, members only clubs, etc. I think of the gatekeeper thinking that they know who should be in and out, either rightfully or not rightfully.
So how have you been kept? How have you been someone who has been kept out of something by a gatekeeper? Has that ever happened to you? Well, now's the perfect time for my illustration. So this morning, when I arrived at church, I had a package. It was addressed to the church, but then specifically to Don. And I got a wonderful book about how queer people need to change. And it even had a torn out page of Romans for me to read so I could understand what my wrong way of thinking, being, and teaching is. So this, thank you, anonymous sender, for gatekeeping. And he's giving me an illustration this morning. This person, whoever it was, I'm going to go with a man because men tend to be assholes like that more than women, and the handwriting shit. So that being said, this was sent to me. It was sent to all of you. It wasn't just sent to me. I mean, it had my name on it, but since you attend this church, this book is meant to tell you that you are less than whoever it was that sent this book, because you attend a church that says that people that are queer, people that don't function in a normative, heteronormative relationship, or think that it's okay to not do that, that they are bad people and that they need to change. So you all have been gate kept this morning, and I'm going to emphasize the gay in the gate keeping. And so I want to know, how do you feel? Like, I have lots of emotions about this. How do you feel that somebody thinks that because you attend this church, you are not as good as them, and you don't have the same rights to the world to come that they have? How does that make you feel? Angry?
Fuck that shit.
Yep. Lee? Go ahead, Amanda.
Angry. I mean, I've got family that you were looking for examples. I've got family that thinks because I don't vote the way they do, I'm going to hell.
You know, John, for me, I think I'm apathetic. I really don't give a shit, to be honest with you.
Agree. But the thing is this, like, as much as I want to say that this morning, like, laugh it off or whatever and roll my eyes, guess what? When I was talking about it just now and sharing it, I was trying not to get emotional, because this person thinks that I am not worthy of God. Me personally, as a queer person, this person thinks that I am not worthy of God, and thinks that what I am teaching you, or what any one of our teachers that sit in this space teach, could potentially or is going to rob you of your own salvation.
When you were first, about the first 15 seconds that you were talking about the book, I felt offended at first, but I think I'm so used to maybe looking for a way to get offended or angry. So I got offended. Then I just thought, like, I took a pity, like, poor person, like, how little they know. So it was like a mix of emotions. I got offended real quick. And I tried to calm down and just listen to what you were explaining about it. And so I'm like half and half. I'm offended, like, how dare they? And then, like, how little they know about the church and the people here. So
yeah, not only do they not know us, but we don't know who they are, because they didn't even have the courage to tell us who they were. The return address is for a mega church in Indiana, and I'm pretty sure the mega church believes this. In fact, the author on the back of this, Beckett Cook, might be one of the pastors at that church. I don't know, but the church would never do this as a church program. Like, they're a mega church. They're too slick to send out something like this, especially since I think this is a King James version of the Bible that was torn out and stuck in here. So, yeah, anybody else? Folks online. Quentin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, honestly, when my family, finally got to know that, I'm bi, and, for like the last several years, like, they did try to vilify me to imply that, I'm not Christian enough, I mean, I'm going to hell here and there. And I still respond with, a simplified, so,
Yeah.
like, it's like they're not allowing their understanding to, of why. But at the same time, it's not up to me to prove them that I should be worthy of their table.
Agreed. Thank you. Anybody else?
It upsets me very much.
Yeah.
Because Heather's gay,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want her to, she hasn't been to church lately because she doesn't feel like she belongs.
Yeah. And there's lots of people that would tell her she doesn't. And that,
Right.
more than anything, as a pastor, makes me so mad. Yeah, Darnell.
I'm gonna be real honest, and there might have been like a misinterpretation somewhere in the world, but before I came here, I thought being gay or homosexual was a sin also. Then I came here and seen Wade and found out that you married him. I'm like, okay, there's something I missed or something that I was told that was incorrect.
Yeah.
Because we talked a whole lot. And
Darnell, I appreciate that's very generous of you to share that, because that takes courage to do that. And, I want to say that that's the other danger of gatekeeping, is gatekeeping prevents people from learning, right? Because if you're told, if there's a beware of dog sign on someone's fence, how often do you jump the fence to check to see if there is a dog, right? And so gatekeeping, in a lot of ways, actually forces you to stop exploring, stop asking questions. In fact, that's what it wants you to do. It wants you to just assume that whoever it is that's keeping the gate is the one that is the holder of all that is true, and you shouldn't go anywhere else to find truth, because gatekeepers are terrified of that. So any other thoughts before I move to the next part? And the next part that I have for you, I think is going to be potentially interesting, and I'm really curious to hear what you're going to say, but any other thoughts on this piece? All right, so if gatekeeping seems antithetical in our minds, at least here at Dust, if it seems antithetical to the way that God behaves, then why is there all these rules about who can and cannot participate within the temple and within the systems of God that we read about in the Bible? Why are there all these rules that seem to be gatekeeping rules? There's a court of Gentiles, there's a court of women, there's the priestly court, there is the high priest court, there is, or not high priest court, but there is the section for the high priest only. And then there's the Holy of Holies. And there's all these levels and entrances and gates. Why do you think, how is that not, or is this where we go Marcion and we have this Marcion thinking? Marcion is a heretic from around 200 CE who said the God of the Old Testament was a different God than the God of the New Testament, which you still hear in the church today, to be fair, right? That Jesus is loving and kind, God is harsh and punishing and cruel. Thank goodness for Jesus, right? So that's Marcionism light, if you will. So how is it that what we read in Torah, particularly in Leviticus, when it's laying out the temple practices, this entity, this God of mercy and love and justice and compassion, the God of the oppressed, seems to have some gates? What do you think? Why?
Don, if I could at least take a stab at this. I think it's because there is such a huge difference between how God thinks about humanity. Well, how God perceives, how God sees, and how humanity sees. There's a huge difference. We don't see as God sees, though we think that we do. So there's a difference between the mortal and the immortal.
Yeah.
You know, so all of the regulations about like who can enter into the Holy of Holies, there's a huge difference between God and humanity. And that's my simplistic answer. I guess I could go into greater detail, but I'll just leave it at that.
Well, actually, Mitch, I appreciate that, but and I'm happy for you to go into a little bit more detail, because in some ways, and Mitch, I've known you for a long time, so I know this isn't your stance on this. That what you just said could be viewed as just a simple dismissal with no real defense of God. It's just, well, God's different than us. And so anytime we can't explain something, we just say, well, God's bigger than us. And obviously, you as a student of the text, you do have thoughts and ideas. So if you do want to, or we want to open the floor for other people to share ideas and then come circle back, I would love to hear more.
Well, I appreciate that offer, Don. To be honest with you, I think for me, it is simplistic, is that as human beings, we often ascribe human characteristics to who God is. Okay, so God perceives the world in the same way that I do. That's absurd to think about.
That's making God in our image instead of
it is. And so God does not perceive, I mean, we're talking about gatekeeping. It's absurd that we are gatekeepers to begin with. It's an absurd notion, because we don't see all, we don't hear all. And I think that's one of personally, I think that's one of the reasons that Moses was described as the most humble person in the world, is because he, of all people, like in the Old Testament, he was able to let go of human perception on situations, okay, and take on, God's perception of situations. So, I mean, I'll open it up to the floor, but I just feel like it's a completely absurd tenet to think that we can perceive the world as God perceives the world. And I really do believe that it takes humility in order to see that, is that I don't know all, I don't see all. Gatekeepers assume that they know and see all, which is plain bullshit.
Yeah. Ken, I just want to apologize to you because you've heard a lot of swearing today. There's been a lot of finger flipping done. And I know you get offended so fucking easily. And my bad.
So can you give a smiley face to when you're taunting him?
Yeah.
That he wants to keep people out of the bathroom when he's using it.
Yes.
But also Craig says it's not our gate to keep.
It's not our gate to keep. We have with your Homer Simpson hand. Yeah, Lee, your hand is up. So what do you have?
Yeah, me. Hi. Yeah, I thought I would, use that instead of just, interrupting. And hopefully I'm not stepping on your toes, but I know I know I completely anyway. I think it's interesting because I think you're mixing scenarios, because you talked about Leviticus, which is the tabernacle, and then you talked about the court of the Jew or the Gentiles and the court of women, which is with the physical temple. And one, a question I have that I've learned from Mitch is, did God ever intend the tabernacle to be a permanent, stationary, physical thing? And with the tabernacle, we don't see a court of the Gentiles or the court of the women. So is that something people did that was not part of God's original vision? And I like Amanda's idea as well, like the idea that, maybe this was like maybe the women were like, hey, we want our own court to be women in. I mean, and, we see those spaces in times now. And then going further into that, the idea that Leviticus and the codes there are not about, right, the idea of purity and sin are two separate concepts, and that you can be unpure without sinning. Impure without sinning, yes. And that part of those the Levitical codes is about purity, and this increased need for purity and proximity to God. Right, and that we see that, I guess an example I think of is, oh gosh, Aaron's two sons, the one we all know because they got burned alive, like they did not follow in the, what they call it, like the glory of God consumed them, and this idea that God cannot come face to face because it will consume us. And yeah, those are some of my thoughts. So the idea that
Those are amazing thoughts and questions, Lee. Excellent job.
I had a good teacher.
Mitch is amazing. All right, so
Don, you were a great teacher of me. Thank you.
So any other thoughts on this? Anyone want to build on this? Do you need the mic? Dewan, do you have something? No? Okay. Did you need the mic? No? Okay. All right. So nothing? So here, let me ask you a question that maybe this will help and lead to your points. The difference between the tabernacle and the temple was so good and wonderful. And even when we think about who ultimately are the gatekeepers, and when Israel goes to God and says, we want to have a permanent temple, and God's like, do you? And then next thing you know, they're like, and we want a king. And God's like, do you? And it tends to be the more power you have, the more that you feel you have the right, the authority, and in many cases, the obligation, you feel you have an obligation to gatekeep. So before, I'm going to bury the lead just a little bit longer on my thinking on this, because I want to ask, because here at Dust, we also gatekeep, right? This person that sent me this book, if they came into this space and in any way attempted to diminish, harm, just verbally harm, disparage, anything, we would gatekeep their ass right out the front door, right? I would. I don't know, maybe I'd be alone, but I would, because to me, the safety of this space for people is more important in that moment than the feelings of that one individual. Now, that one individual could come in here, Darnell, you kind of shared this a little bit, could come in here with these views and find a space that they could sit and listen and learn and interact and would continue to be welcomed in this space, right? But for us, the conflict would be harm. So is there a difference between gatekeeping that protects and gatekeeping that eliminates? What are your thoughts?
But what I did want to say was, you know, when you talk about the difference between gatekeeping to protect and gatekeeping to exclude, you know, one, of course, the argument of that person who sent that would be, oh, well, we're trying to protect by pointing you in the right direction,
Right.
which is
had cancer. Tell them.
But I also think of the tolerance paradox that they talk about, where
Tolerating tolerance.
exactly, tolerating tolerance until you can't tolerate intolerance. Exactly, but then it creates an environment that breeds more intolerance. So I guess I kind of think about your question in those terms and going, there's definite difference, because it is about what the motivation is, you know, truly caring or going, I have the right answer and I'm going to tell you you're wrong out of love for you, air quotes and everything. But I mean, that's obviously not love. So, yeah.
Their love feels very wrong.
Lee shared the inclusivity statement from the Dust website. Do you want me to read that, Lee? I guess that's a yes.
Can you guys hear Andrew? Okay.
I mean, if he wants, he can read it. I mean, it's on the website for everyone.
Well,
yeah,
Oh, Tana wants it read.
Please read it.
Those that hold views contrary to our community's views on these matters are welcome to enjoy the full benefits of the congregation, as long as their words and actions do not threaten or limit the ability of the marginalized persons to live, lead, and learn the truth of God's love authentically and safely.
Yeah, when our team came up with that statement, it blew me away. It's so good and reflects so much of what we hold important here, because we don't want to silence opposition. We just want the opposition and the discussion around differences to be one that doesn't harm people in the midst of the discussion. So let me ask this. Let's imagine men particularly, but humans were in charge of a system like that which God put in place about the temple and the tabernacle. What do you think that if they were to build that structure, what do you think the goal of the Holy of Holies in that setting would be? And I don't even think we need to stretch our mind too much to try and parse that out. I think we can just think of what is the Holy of Holies in the United States? What is it that the president, you think, or Congress or the Senate protects? We need the mic in the back right corner. Back right to my right.
The money.
Money? Anything else?
No, that's not my thing.
Anything else?
Kind of says, in theory, the Constitution.
Constitution, yep, in theory.
Access to power.
Access to power. Anybody else? We might need to get more than one of those. All right. So what is it that God is protecting in the Holy of Holies? What takes place behind closed doors when men are protecting the Holy of Holies? And what takes place behind closed doors when God is protecting the Holy of Holies? What is the role of the high priest? What is the role of the ephod? What is the role that the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies once a year to do? Speak to God, okay? Come on, people of the text. What does the high priest do in the Holy of Holies before God? What does the ephod represent? It has stones on it. What do the stones represent? They intercede. Keep going, Lee.
I'll just
Atone.
unmute to go for this. So the well, I mean, no one else is answering, so I guess I'll answer. Unless someone else wants to before I go.
Nope. Go ahead, Lee.
So right, the high priest represents Israel, like right, that's the ephod and with all the stones and just various other ways, and that it's interceding for Israel on behalf, or yeah, on behalf of Israel and representing Israel to God, right? And that we see that with the bull offering that the high priest offers, that in, and you know, we're talking in our talks about intercessionary stuff, that in some ways the priest becomes Israel to God, and you know, bears the sins and the goodness of Israel on their shoulders. So
Yep. And so, Lee, on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest goes in, what is the high priest hoping to achieve in that space? And you already said a lot of it, but you know, I just want you to finish the thought because you're right on.
I guess communion with God.
For who?
For Israel.
Yeah,
and
forever.
I mean, and like, right, so and we see in the text that talks about, like, you know, you have, you know, the Levites are the priests to Israel, and Israel is a priesthood to the nations. And so that, I mean, you could look at it as that this is meant for communion and for a fullness of relationship with not just Israel and God, but Israel on behalf of the nations and the whole world with God.
Right. So if you have the priesthood, who are the priests to all nations, and their role is to stand before God on their behalf. And then you have the high priest who stands before God on behalf of Israel. The whole gatekeeping system, if you will, within Torah is for the redemption, reconciliation, restoration, mercy, compassion, and justice for all people. The goal is to see justice abound throughout the entire world. When we gatekeep, typically, we don't gatekeep for those reasons. We create a social club in Toledo for entrepreneurs and people that get things done, and then charge $200 a month, because the only people that get things done are the people that can afford $200 a month to be a part of this group. Yes. Can you use the mic?
Gatekeeping.
You talk louder so I can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Speaking of gatekeeping, kids my age, teenagers leading going to high school, we gatekeep each other all the time.
So
Social.
how do you do that?
Maybe you feel like we are. We feel like we're stronger in a way because sometimes we gatekeep to defend our, like if we made a certain friend group, we're gonna gatekeep to keep people away from that friend group because we're afraid of anyone new. Because my old friend group, we used to do this all the time. We were very hesitant to let people into our friend group because we were like because they were like the other half of our class. We were like the cool kids, and then they're like us, the nerds. But it was like a lot more even. So it wasn't just one of us getting, the whole class was just picking on one of us. It was a lot more even. So when the new kid came, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to act. And sometimes we pushed them to the cool kids. I'm gonna use quotation marks. They weren't really cool, just very hood rat. Very, very hood rat. So, but that's something I always wanted to be a part of until I realized I wasn't going to be. And yeah, so.
Yeah, that's excellent, Dewan. So how do you that you could be better? Like, and maybe yourself, even just thinking about teenagers in general, and
stop being so judgmental.
So let me ask you, that's a great statement. So why do we value, and it's terrible to value it, but why do you think we value judging others?
Just feel strong. Makes us feel like we're better about everything about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about
the fact that teenagers like me, we go through puberty, body changes, awkward. It's very.
Yeah, excellent. Any other thoughts or questions? So what do you think then should be our approach to spaces and when we see gatekeeping happen? What is our role as members of the faithful when we see gatekeeping happening? Are we to remain silent? Are we to speak up against it and bring the ire of the gatekeepers upon us? Are we supposed to be subversive and maybe dig under the fence and go in another way? What do you imagine is God's hopes for God's people when it comes to, whenever we have a system that is so independent and so individualistic like Western culture is, right? Like be an individual and, be your own self, be unique, all these things that make us try to set ourselves apart. And then as soon as we set ourselves apart, we go and find a whole bunch of people just like us, right? Which is what we do. So how do we fight against these systems? And where do you think we start?
Well, I don't know if this is, I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but I hadn't been to synagogue in a long time, and I went to the synagogue and I felt uncomfortable because I was a newcomer and I didn't have someone with me. I was alone. So I felt kind of out of place. Is that part of it?
So one of the ways I would say that to help you in that setting would be, you know, post and say, hey, is anyone available to go to synagogue with me? And someone could go with you, and that would help break down some of that gatekeeping feeling. And some of that's our own baggage, and some of that's the space's baggage, right? But there are ways, yeah, I think people being made to feel new or not as part of the clique, kind of what you were saying earlier, Dewan, like being in a clique of all the right people and kids and stuff, you can be made to feel ostracized. So yeah, I think you're pointing to something like that. Amanda, did you have something?
I don't know if everybody heard what Dewan had to say, because I saw a couple comments pop up, but I wanted to say, Dewan said something to the effect of gatekeeping can often lead to bullying, and I thought that was a really great comment that he made. The other thing I was thinking, to answer your question about what can we do to stop gatekeeping or try to reverse the tide or whatever. First of all, I think it starts with me. I have to realize where in my life I'm gatekeeping other people, and be self-aware enough to know, okay, like, quite frankly, I do a lot of gatekeeping with some of my family, because my family can be very toxic. So I have to recognize the difference there, but I have to also recognize when that gatekeeping has turned into judgment, has turned into, well, I'm a student of the text, so I really know what the Bible has to say, and they're wrong and all that stuff, and those kinds of things. So I think it starts with me. But then thinking what Janet said, I also think that when we're in a space and we have newcomers that come into our space, explaining who we are, you know, and what the different things that we're doing, like, you know, maybe if somebody new was here and we said, okay, this is the time where we do something called Shema, and here's what Shema is and why we do it, even if it was just a couple of sentences to explain things, I think that helps in those settings, and it kind of makes people feel more welcome. And, you know, to direct it to the newcomer, just even if it was part of a simple liturgy or whatever. So
one of the things that you're talking about that's interesting, I hadn't considered, is hidden rules. Excuse me. Hidden rules in spaces ultimately contributes to gatekeeping. So like when you walk into someone's house and you're visiting, and all of a sudden you're 5 steps in and you realize you were supposed to take your shoes off and you didn't know that, and now you feel weird because you didn't and you don't know what to do, or you all of a sudden realize I'm wearing my socks that are completely worn through on the bottom. And so there is space where the hidden rules become the gatekeeper even. And so if you're in, it's wink, wink, nod, nod. We can identify who the person is that isn't familiar with us, and that's another way. Yeah. I think to what you were saying, Amanda, I think maybe even one step further back is how we gatekeep ourselves. I think we find ourselves on the wrong side of gates that we've created often. That I'm not good enough to teach. I'm not good enough to apply for this job. I'm not good enough to engage in certain ways. And good enough is often the gate, if you can't tell, that that's my gate. The gate that sits in front of me that's big is not good enough gate. But we all have gates. What are some of your gates that keep you, and let's just say it, the whole point of the text is to experience fullness of life, right? We often translate that idea of fullness of life to eternal life in the New Testament, the way the Greek is, because we like the word aeon as eon. but it really implies more of this idea of a fullness, which I can see how it got to eons or eternal, because it's the fullness of time. The fullness of life is eternal. But we're meant to experience the fullness of life. So what are the gates that keep you out from eternal life, fullness of life?
Well, I was
Do you have to-
a lot of activity online.
Yeah. A few things from the chat. You actually stole Tana's idea after she had typed it before you said it.
What was that?
So maybe it was parallel thinking. But Tana said, I know this is really isn't what you're getting at, but I gatekeep myself a lot. But a lot of that gatekeeping was instilled in me by other people. Tamaha says the clock he was looking at in the spare room while he was cleaning today was set an hour behind.
Blah, blah, blah.
So Tana said his clock was being a gatekeeper.
So any other ones?
No, that's
So I want you guys to name your gates. Like there's the beautiful gate in the Bible, right? There are gates that are listed in the Bible that have power on us. I'm not talking like a mystical sense, but what are the gates that keep you from experiencing fullness of life?
Tana says not thin enough, not smart enough. Lee says qualified, like in jobs.
Sometimes I feel less of a person, like always procrastinating, just always like procrastinating.
Yeah.
Always putting stuff off when needs to be done. And I need to stop doing that and get a little bit more organized.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Some other things online are bad skin, bad teeth.
Not easy to palm.
I'm much better at throwing than I am. I would say, and I don't know if James would agree with me on this one, but not productive enough.
Mm.
And there's a lot of stuff that, like right now, I'm losing my hair and I'm going bald, and I'm really sensitive about it.
Yeah.
So, but it's just one of many things. Somebody mentioned bad skin and not being thin enough and everything. So to me, it's just in general, I have never, since I was a little girl, been pretty enough. I've never been feminine enough in a lot of ways. So.
Thank you. I can't express, I want to be clear here that I think it's very honoring people's willingness to share this out loud, right? I also want to be clear that if any of you are uncomfortable that this is recorded and that we'll post it on YouTube, let me know. And this one won't be posted. You can let me know privately so no one has to be like, to say out loud that they don't want it. But here's the thing. I've discovered in my life, when I gatekeep myself, I often block the way for others to walk through that same gate. Now, this is a really, really fine balance, because what I'm saying here could make you start to beat yourself up for blocking people from walking through the gate, because we're all really good at taking something and making it again, look at how bad and terrible I am. But I don't want you to do it that way. Instead, I want you to think about it like the rabbis would talk about how much more. How much more if you are able to begin to be able to walk through some of these gates that have been locked to you in the past? Will you trailblaze for others to walk through those gates? That as you recognize and say, you know what? It's okay that I have a 47, soon to be 48-year-old body, and it's no longer 32. And if my shirts fit me more snugly now than they have, that's okay. And if I can get to a place where I can break down some of those gates, some of those doors. I think about Jesus when he's at Caesarea Philippi and he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against you, right? What are the gates of hell prevailing against us? And how do we break them down? And I think there are some significant ways. I think community is one of the ways. To be around each other, to share almost like confessional, like we did today, some of the gates that are hard for us, because you've heard what people have said are their gates. Guess what? You might have a key to that gate. You might know another way around that gate. And so I think it's important that in community, we share what the things are that we're wrestling with, we're struggling with, the things that hold us back from being fullness of ourself and fullness of life, because in community, we're able to share ways to move forward. After we do that, not even after, even during that, we begin to have that same opportunity outside of our community. We get to demonstrate that to people that we meet throughout the week. We get to do that with people that we engage on social media, or that we get to show people how to move through these gates that have been locked to so many of us for so long. Darnell?
I like being my own gatekeeper, like when it comes to the church community, because it be times where I feel like I wish I could see them or talk to them more than one day a week, but then there's a whole chat with about 50 chats a day, and I just don't be a part of it. But I feel like I'm cheating myself because I can be a part of Dust more than one day a week, because there's a chat that goes on every day, about 50 chats a day. So I feel like I'm kind of cheating myself. Like I can control that.
Yeah.
All I gotta do is say something, somebody will say something back eventually. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, we all have these ways that we gatekeep ourselves. Anyone have any other thoughts or things that they want to add, gates that they struggle with, or gates that they've recently kicked the ass of, knocked down, ran through?
Some gate from the chat. Not enough energy, not good enough in general, not as good as other people or a specific person, not loving or compassionate enough.
Seriously,
feeling like the oppressor.
I think we could probably all just about raise our hand. Like we all are surrounded by very similar gates, right? Like I didn't hear anyone there that I didn't at some level go, yep, that's a gate I got, right?
Add to that, one of my gates is I'll use the term that's trendy, but woke enough. I'm not doing enough to be a better ally for so many different marginalized communities. And I have to stop gatekeeping myself by realizing that I am trying, and it's starting with learning, and it's starting with the internal stuff.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know enough, then there's no way that I can really speak to something. You know, I may know in my heart that something's true, you know, like you should not be a racist, but I may not be educated enough to go, this is racism and everything. So that's kind of one thing that I gatekeep myself on, but I'm trying not to. So
the irony is sometimes I actually through the gate, but we don't believe it. And so we still act like we're on the outside, right? Like you are an ally, you are anti-racist, but yet you somehow, and not, when I'm saying you, I really mean plural, the Greek you, if you will, you plural, y'all, yins, that we sometimes are actually through the gate, but we don't feel like we deserve to be there. And so we still behave as we're outside the gate.
Perfect thought. I'm still working through it, but I know it's where we're all at, but gatekeeping to me is very much about authority. You know, are we granted the blessing of passage, or are we strong enough? Are we good enough? Whatever else is that authority. And what you're saying about we go through a gate and we get past that, we are not allowing ourselves to recognize that authority. We finally have made it. We have somehow passed that bridge, and we have a voice that we can share, and we don't believe it ourselves.
Yes.
So yeah, we go through a gate and we throw the next one right up in front of ourselves again.
Yeah. Feel or imagine doesn't even. We all have that self-imposed prison that our gates are more like prisons in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Through, and we won't give ourselves credit for having made it. So we don't give ourselves the power to say, yes, I can speak to this because I am better than I was.
Con, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we even saw you for a split second.
Yeah, that wasn't meant to happen. Amanda's comment got me to thinking about something, and then James sort of touched on it. I don't know if this is like, if gates are the exact right metaphor here or not, but I was thinking about how, like, we talked about how, like, basically we talked about like good gates and bad gates, and the good gates for protecting people. I think if we push on that gate and we come up against resistance, like we're saying, assuming we're well-meaning, right? Then we need to learn and then come back and try again. Like maybe we might not have the key to the gate right away. And the reason I was thinking that is because with what Amanda said with being an ally to different communities and being anti-racist. And at my previous job, one of the things I had shared in one of our anti-racist spaces was that I was often silent in these spaces because I was so afraid of saying the wrong thing. And the response from the people of color in the room was like, well, you're not going to learn if you just, if you're silent, then we think you don't care. And if you don't say anything, you're not going to learn. And this is a safe space where you can learn and then go out and be, a more positive force. So that's just something I was thinking about in terms of like, sometimes we mix our own personal gatekeeping stuff of like, oh, I'm not good enough, right? And then we like come up against another gate where somebody's like, oh, that's not a good thing to say in this situation. What you're saying is kind of racist or is like peddling in stereotypes or something, you know what I mean? And then our personal gate will go up and be like, oh, I can't be in this space. I can't be this person. I can't be good. I suck. And then walk away instead of being like, oh, can you show me how to open this gate?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Tana. So I'm gonna wrap us up here, okay? And then we'll do prayer requests. So let me ask you this. Where is, how do I want to ask it? What is the point of a gate in the Bible? When we read about gates in the Bible, what is it there for? What happens in the gates of cities?
Well, that's where the elders met in order to counsel.
And do what else? What else happened in those gates? Yes, absolutely. Elders. What's that?
To pass judgment. Okay, so
yes. Go ahead. You keep going. Sorry.
No, I mean, like as a matter of fact, the thing that came to my mind is at the gates of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so
I just want to say that Mitch brought it up, not me, because I know I always get with Abraham and the three visitors. It was Mitch that brought it up this time. So you don't get to mark that on your bingo card.
The people of the cities of the plain to counsel.
Yes.
All right. So basically, he ended up adopting the very attitudes of the people of the cities of the plains.
Yes.
And I feel like we do the same thing. So Lot was part of Abraham's family. He knew, but he decided to like enter into that relationship with these cities. He adopted their mindset. So basically, he was camping at their gate. He was camping at their gate.
Yep. So Mitch, if you will, what does the Bible intentionally juxtapose Lot in the gate with? What does it compare it to, basically?
To be honest with you, Don, are you talking about something that is actually written in the text or?
Yes, the chapter prior.
To be honest with you, I don't remember. I'm going to take a stab at this, but I remember Lot and Abraham's basically dividing up where their pasture was going to be.
Yeah. So as soon as I say it, you're going to be like, go ahead, Lee.
He already gave us all a hint. It's Abraham and the three strangers, where Abraham runs to meet them from God.
Yes. And think about the picture. Abraham is sitting, and I'm going to use a term that isn't in the text, but Abraham is sitting in the gate of his tent with God, who is judge, God, who is over all things. So in Abraham's gate, he sees strangers and he runs out and welcomes them through his gate. Sodom and Gomorrah, or at the gate of Sodom, Lot and his team, not necessarily Lot, but the residents, the judges of Sodom, attempt to kill the visitors. And this is the juxtaposition of God's gate versus man's gate. And I want to end with this. I want us to be gate smashers. I want that for us so badly. Okay, I'm not ending. Amanda's going to end for us.
No, and I apologize if this is triggering for anybody, but I think anybody who knows things about sexual violence, like rape and everything, study after study shows that it's not about sexual desire, really. It's about dominance and authority. And to think that the people of Sodom wanted to rape the visitors, it was just another way of asserting authority over them.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was just another way to judge their worth and their value and how they were seen by that community. And so for me and for our community, I want us to think about how now, brown cow, how now that we are in a space where we can start to gather physically together again, we can start to be in the community again. How is it that we become gate smashers? How do we start to tear down the things that have kept others out? How do we demonstrate that we are good enough and we break down our own? And how do we continue to share what we're struggling with so others can help convince us and demonstrate to us and show us how we are worthy of a fullness of life? That's what I want us to be about. So Tana, your hand is up. I don't know if it has just remained up or if it is a new raising of hand. And then Mitch, I see your hand is up as well. Okay, go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out is we're talking about gates. I think a lot of it has to do with how we perceive the gate, because there's lots of different kinds of gates. There's a garden gate. There is a giant steel gate that separates us from the interior maybe of some place. So I think that has a lot to do with some gates appear to be impenetrable, so we never try to break them down.
Yep.
Other gates, like a garden gate, basically just has a latch and you just swing it open and enter in. So I think we need to help each other to have a realistic, I guess, perception of what these gates look like and what they really are.
Yeah.
Because I can get into a frame of mind where that gate is impenetrable and I will not, what's the point of trying to breach that gate if it's impenetrable?
Yeah. Thank you. You know, I think the church is an example of the rabbi said, sometimes you build walls to protect something and you build them so high that they crumble and destroy the very thing you meant to protect. And I think in a lot of ways that is the Christian church. The Christian church kept building walls trying to protect itself. And what has happened now is those walls have become so high and they've begun to crumble and they're destroying the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. And we have the opportunity to pick through that rubble. We have the opportunity to find a way forward and to build a different way of thinking about it. So let me pray over us, and then we'll do prayer requests. Lord, you are so good, and I pray, Lord, that we can be people who seek the welfare of the communities that we're in. I pray that we can be demonstrators of gate smashing, that we can feel encouraged and loved by those around us to push through, or to recognize we are already through, to be encouraged about where we stand and where we still need to go. Help us to be a community that holds one another strong, encourages, loves, and brings about fullness of life for one another. Lord, we thank you, we praise you, we give you all the glory. In your most precious, holy, wonderful name I pray. Amen.